The dirtiest trick Machiavelli ever revealed to make a woman think about you has nothing to do with flowers, compliments, or declarations. It involves silent control. This is not seduction, this is strategy. You do not conquer through presence, but through absence. Not through romance, but through mystery. When you become the doubt she cannot resolve, her mind turns into a cage, and you become the thought that never leaves. You do not capture a woman's mind by being kind, predictable, or transparent. The human mind does not fixate on what it understands. It fixates on what creates tension, on what escapes it, on what feels designed to be deciphered but never truly revealed. This dirtiest trick works because it does not operate on the surface. It moves in the psychological underground, in the region where she does not even realize she is being influenced. Everything begins by creating a presence that is not obvious. Most men present themselves like an open book, desperate to be understood, accepted, admired. You do the opposite. You present yourself like a book with no title, no synopsis, no cover. Something that reveals nothing, yet promises everything. And that invisible promise becomes the first chain that forms inside her mind, because the human brain cannot tolerate gaps without trying to fill them. You become an enigma, and an enigma does not need to be solved immediately. It only needs to become impossible to ignore. This trick begins by breaking predictability. You appear with precision, never excess. A short sentence, a look that lasts half a second longer than it should, a comment that feels like it hides something, yet explains nothing, and then you disappear. Absence is the fertile ground where obsession grows, because it is in the void that she begins to imagine, project, interpret. She tries to understand what it is about you that feels different, and the more she tries, the further she moves from the truth, and the deeper you penetrate her emotional terrain. Machiavelli understood this clearly. He who controls interpretation controls the other. By refusing to explain yourself, you force her to create explanations for you. Explanations that always reveal more about her repressed desires than about who you truly are. The dirty key here is simple. You do not need to be extraordinary. You only need to be impossible to decipher. Her mind will work on its own, night after night, trying to fill the spaces you left there on purpose. What she feels is not love, it is not desire, it is unease. And unease is the most powerful addiction that exists, because it does not rest until it finds an answer. But you never give the answer, you only offer fragments. A compliment that sounds sincere, but ends in ambiguity. A gesture of interest that feels too calculated to be spontaneous. A strong presence that disappears before it becomes comfortable. You become the imbalance she tries to correct. And while she tries, she thinks about you. And while she thinks, she falls. The dirtiest trick is not to conquer. It is to become mentally inevitable. The game begins to change the moment you apply the most ruthless strategy in attraction psychology. The calculated alternation between closeness and distance. This is where most men fail, because they do it in a disorganized, emotional, reactive way. You do not. You execute like someone moving pieces on a chessboard where only you can see the full map. Sudden closeness creates warmth. It opens emotional doors. It lowers defenses. Sudden distance slams those doors shut and leaves her mind pounding against them, asking why. When the human mind feels that something has been taken away, it begins to value what it did not even realize it had. And when you disappear right after showing presence, she starts to miss you before she ever truly had you. That absence is the real poison. It seeps slowly into her consciousness. The dirty trick is making her believe she is in emotional control while you regulate everything, from the rhythm of the conversations to the weight of the silences. You respond when it is not expected. You go silent when she assumes you should reply. Each broken expectation reorganizes her focus. She no longer thinks about other men, hobbies, problems, or achievements. She begins to monitor you. She watches timing, patterns, small signals. Her mind becomes conditioned to look for you, and that conditioning is the essence of emotional domination. This is not love, this is not longing, this is surveillance. And whoever watches has already lost. The mistake most men make is trying to be desired through presence, but desire is born from absence. When you appear rarely and disappear often, she creates a myth about you, an idealized character, an amplified version that does not fully match reality. But because she no longer has access to reality, she believes the fiction she created, and fiction is always stronger than truth. Her fiction is shaped by desire, insecurity, distorted memories, and the biological impulse to understand what cannot be explained. You do not need to compete with other men. She does not compare you to real people. She compares you to the stories her own mind invented. and you always win when the competition is imaginary. The alternation works because it activates two opposing forces inside her: the fear of losing you and the hope of gaining you. Fear keeps her alert, hope keeps her trapped. It becomes a vicious cycle she does not recognize because it feels natural, it feels emotional, it feels like chemistry. But chemistry has nothing to do with this. What she feels is the result of a pattern you implanted with surgical precision. Machiavelli said that whoever controls fear holds power, but whoever controls hope maintains control without being noticed. You offer crumbs of hope, a look, an ambiguous sentence, a compliment that does not repeat itself. Then you remove everything with silence. She tries to understand your movement, but there is no real movement. There is only orchestrated reaction. The most perverse part of this trick is that the more she tries to maintain dignity and act as if she does not care, the more destabilized she becomes. Because to pretend indifference, she has to think about you in order to sustain the act. Her indifference is a mask built over obsession. And you know it worked not when she reaches out, but when she struggles not to. Because it is in the effort to resist that she confirms she is already taken. The most Machiavellian part of all this is the subtlety. You never need to say that you feel something. You never need to show explicit interest. You never need to give yourself away. You simply keep her emotional scale tilted in the direction you choose. You become the constant imbalance. The point that does not fit logic, the voice that echoes even when you are silent. And her mind, exhausted from searching for explanations, creates a single solution: to keep thinking about you until everything makes sense. But it never will, because that is the core of the trick. True Machiavellian filth begins the moment you understand this. Her mind does not fall in love with you. It falls in love with its own reactions to you. What you do next is intensify every micro-doubt, every uncertainty, every emotional contradiction that has already taken root inside her. A woman who thinks about you constantly is not thinking about who you are. She is thinking about what you represent. An unresolved emotional enigma. And as long as the enigma remains unsolved, she remains trapped. You do not give answers. You only open doors that lead into darker and darker corridors inside her mind. Each corridor is a possibility. Each possibility becomes a scenario. And each scenario is another hour she spends imagining you. That is the dirty trick. You do not compete with tension. You hijack it. This is where you begin using the most powerful weapon in the psychological game: calculated contradiction. Human nature cannot tolerate paradoxes. When you act one way today and completely differently tomorrow, she tries to align those two realities into a coherent narrative. But the more she tries, the further she moves from any solid conclusion. One day, you say something that feels intimate, deep, almost revealing. The next day, you appear cold, distant, ironic. This oscillation is not insecurity, it is strategy. Her mind enters a state of hyper-interpretation, analyzing every gesture, every sentence, every silence. And constant analysis is nothing more than attachment in disguise. Anyone who thinks about you too much is already inside the game. The most brilliant and most cruel part of this technique is that it awakens a silent instinct of competition inside her, not with other women, but with herself. She begins to compare the version of herself she believes you see with the version she wishes you would see. And from that comparison, emotional self-pressure is born. Is she interesting enough? Do you consider her special? Did she say something that pushed you away? Did you notice something in her that made her seem ordinary? These questions multiply like a virus, and with each question, she mentally returns to you, searching for answers. Dependence begins the moment she tries to improve her own image in order to win you emotionally. Even if you never asked for anything, you already control her the moment she tries to become a better version of herself to fit inside your silence. Contradiction serves another function as well. It creates unpredictable emotional impact, which is the foundation of every strong bond. The human brain releases more dopamine from unexpected rewards than from predictable ones. So when you offer rare attention and then remove it completely, you create emotional peaks and drops inside her. Those peaks are addictive. She begins to crave the next moment when you will be warm, present, or mysteriously gentle. And when that moment finally arrives, even in minimal form, its impact is multiplied. A compliment from you is worth more than 10 from other men, because she never knows when the next one will come. You become an irregular emotional source, and irregular sources create far stronger addictions than constant ones. Now you add an even deeper layer. The inverted mirror. This is the technique where you make small interpretations about her that seem to reveal something hidden. You speak in short sentences, always vague, yet loaded with suggestion. I know you feel more than you show. You try to control everything, but you are afraid of losing. You are more intense than you allow people to see. She does not know where this came from, but she believes you see parts of her that no one else sees. This creates a psychological bond where she feels exposed yet fascinated. The dirty trick is that these phrases work on almost anyone, but they feel as if they were crafted specifically for her. She begins to believe that you understand her on an intimate, almost dangerous level. And feeling understood is the most addictive emotional drug that exists. Meanwhile, you remain unreachable. No matter how much she tries to get closer emotionally, there is always something about you that slips away, that escapes, that refuses to fully reveal itself. And this lack of closure creates psychological dependence. She believes she is almost deciphering you, almost conquering you, almost understanding you, but almost is never enough. It is this absence of conclusion that keeps the story alive. Stories without closure are stories that never end, and stories that never end are stories that imprison. Then the third element of this phase appears, the impression that she has impact on you. Even if she does not, you leave small signals that something about her affects you. A look that lasts longer than it should, a pause before responding, a sentence that suggests you kept thinking about what she said. This activates the instinct of conquest inside her. Now she feels she can affect you, and women always attach themselves to what they believe they can transform. She begins to think she is slowly shaping you, that she is pulling pieces from your armor, that she is reaching an emotional territory no one else has accessed. But all of this is illusion. You offer only enough to keep her believing she is moving forward, when in reality she is walking in circles carefully designed by you, and inside this circle she remains trapped, between the man who seems to feel something and the man who disappears, between the mystery that challenges her and the hope that feeds her, between the doubt that consumes her and the reward that addicts her. The dirtiest trick works because it transforms desire into a labyrinth, and no one wants to leave a labyrinth when they believe the prize is just beyond the next turn. Now we enter the darkest zone. Here the trick stops being merely psychological and becomes almost spiritual, a form of invisible presence that follows her even when you are not there. At this level, you no longer work with direct actions. You work with impressions, emotional marks that fix themselves in memory as if they were lived experiences, not just sensations. The human mind is easily deceived by what feels significant, and you become significant not through quantity, but through intensity. Each word you speak, when placed correctly, echoes inside her for days. Each silence you leave gains interpretations you never had to create. She begins to relate more to the mental version she built of you than to your real presence. And that distance between reality and imagination becomes the swamp where you control everything without doing anything. Here, you begin to manipulate an inevitable phenomenon, constant comparison. She starts measuring every other man by the standard you created, and that standard is cruel, because you do not give yourself away. You are not obvious. You are not always available. You create an emotional scarcity so powerful that any other man, no matter how kind or present he is, appears weak, childish, too simple. Others give everything at once. You always leave something unoffered. Others explain what they feel. You let her guess. Others try to impress her. You make her try to impress you. Reversing the game is the true Machiavellian trick, and you have already done it. When she starts policing herself, preparing herself, getting ready, controlling herself, mentally rehearsing before speaking to you, she has already lost emotional neutrality. You have become her internal reference point. This is also when you use the dirtiest and most elegant weapon of all, indirect emotional emphasis. This means you do not show interest in her. You demonstrate selectivity. You never behave like a man who desires any woman. You behave like a man who desires something specific that very few women possess. You release vague statements like, "Most people do not catch my attention." "It is rare for me to connect with someone." Do not waste time on people without depth. She immediately tries to place herself in that rare category. Human beings love to be the exception, but fear being ordinary. And you awaken that fear and that ambition at the same time. And while she tries to figure out whether she is one of the rare ones, she thinks about you constantly. The search for validation from someone selective is far stronger than the desire for someone available. Now you introduce the most cruel psychological element of all, emotional ambiguity. You never make it clear what role she plays in your life. One day it feels like she is gaining ground. The next, it feels like she lost everything. In one conversation, you are present, almost warm. In the next, it is as if nothing ever happened. This ambiguity creates a light but continuous anxiety that keeps her emotionally awake. Always adjusting her posture, always trying to predict your next move. And this constant anticipation awakens two instincts at the same time: the instinct to conquer you and the instinct to avoid rejection. From this combination, silent obsession is born. An obsession she will never admit to anyone, not even to herself. Ambiguity also creates an emotional void that she tries to fill with memory. She replays conversations, remembers details, analyzes gestures, reinterprets things you said, searching for hidden meanings. She catches herself rebuilding scenes in her own mind, imagining you, imagining what you would do, what you think, what you feel. The dirty trick is this: by doing that, she relives you internally again and again. You become a constant presence, not because you are there, but because she recreates you inside herself. And when a woman recreates you in her imagination, you no longer need to make effort. She does the work for you. This is where the most Machiavellian shift occurs, the displacement of the emotional axis. Before, you were someone who appeared and disappeared. Now, you are someone who appears rarely, but occupies a massive amount of space. You reduce your real investment and increase her mental investment. The less you do, the more she thinks. The more she thinks, the less she notices how little you actually do. This discrepancy creates a one-sided bond disguised as reciprocity. But she does not realize that this force was born inside her, not between you. The human mind confuses internal intensity with external connection. That is the flaw you exploit. And the cruelest point of this stage is that she can no longer forget you, even if she wants to. Because now it is no longer about desire or curiosity, it is about identity. You awakened something inside her that she did not know existed. You activated parts of her psyche that were dormant: insecurities, ambitions, fears, hopes, vanity, the shadow. And when someone awakens deep layers of your identity, you do not forget them. You try to understand them, and while you try, you remain trapped. The dirtiest trick is understanding this. You do not need to be the perfect man. You need to be the man who makes her think and think and think. Now we reach the stage where her mind no longer functions in a neutral way. Every stimulus, every memory, every sensation is filtered through the idea of you. And this is where the dirtiest trick deepens. Because now you begin to manipulate not only what she feels, but how she interprets her own behavior. The Machiavellian secret of this phase is making her believe she is acting by her own free will, when in reality, she is reacting to emotional tensions you carefully introduced. Nothing binds more tightly than the sensation that it was your choice, even when it was not. So you plant triggers. A comment about how you admire people who know how to speak calmly. Another hinting that you are drawn to independent women. A look that suggests approval when she shows confidence. A silence that makes her wonder if she said too much. Slowly, she begins to shape her own behavior to align with what she imagines you value. This is the moment you stop occupying only her mind and begin to occupy her behavior. The most perverse part is that she does not notice the change. She believes she is simply being herself, just a better version. But that improved version exists only because you introduced small emotional incentives. Machiavelli understood this well. There is no manipulation more effective than making the other believe their actions are spontaneous. You stimulate what you desire in her without ever ordering it or demanding it. You release short phrases like, "I like people who know how to stand their ground." And then you observe how she begins to position herself more firmly. You subtly mention that you admire people who do not attach too quickly. And you notice how she tries to act detached while burning inside. She does not want to disappoint a version of you that she herself created. The selective version, the cold version, the intense version, the one that evaluates her without her knowing. She feels as if she is constantly being watched by an invisible gaze of yours, and she begins to act under that gaze. This internal surveillance she creates on her own is the greatest proof that the trick worked. It is in this state of emotional vigilance that you introduce the central weapon of this phase: acute emotional contrast. It is no longer just closeness and distance, it is intensity and neutrality. At certain moments, you make her feel something strong, visceral, almost forbidden. At others, you act as if nothing ever happened. This duality destroys the continuous emotional line inside her. The human brain cannot tolerate this kind of irregularity without trying to explain it. And while it tries to explain, it always returns to you. You become the gravitational center of her emotions because you define the rhythm, the impact, the rise and the fall. She feels emotional warmth coming from you, and shortly after, a cold she cannot ignore. This alternation is not confusing, it is addictive. Emotional impact always defeats stability. Stable people comfort. Unpredictable people consume, and it is the sensation of being consumed that makes her continue. Now the most Machiavellian element of all emerges, the almost romance, that foggy territory where nothing is defined but everything feels possible. You create gestures that feel intimate but never enough to be interpreted as commitment. You make her believe she is something special, but you never confirm it. She wonders whether you feel something, whether there is reciprocity, whether there is a future, but she finds no answers. And while there are no answers, she keeps searching. The almost is more powerful than a yes and far more destructive than a no. A yes resolves, a no ends, but the almost stretches endlessly. And inside that extension, addiction is born. She is not attached to what you have, she is attached to what you could have had. And imagined potential is always stronger than any reality. The dirty trick at this stage is simple. You do not give certainty, you give possibility. A sentence delivered with the right tone becomes hope. A silence at the right moment becomes fear. And hope, mixed with fear, is the exact formula of emotional dependence. You do not learn through love, you learn through doubt. Love is easy, constant doubt is impossible to ignore. She wakes up thinking about what you meant yesterday. She falls asleep wondering why your tone changed today. She lives trying to interpret signals you distribute with mathematical precision, and without realizing it, she has begun organizing her emotional life around you. This is where you activate the technique that defines this phase: intermittent reinforcement of value. From time to time, you treat her as if she were unique. Not always, not excessively, just enough for her to sense that something is there. Then you disappear. You cut the emotional energy, you leave a void she tries to fill alone. That absence hurts more because it came after an emotional peak. She does not only miss you, she misses how she felt when you were present. And the gap between the peak and the void is what pulls her back mentally every time. She is not chasing you, she is chasing the emotional state you awakened in her. Now you reinforce the most cruel sensation of all, imagined exclusivity. She begins to believe that you see something in her that no one else sees. You never need to say this. It is enough to suggest it through subtle words, lingering looks, comments that feel designed specifically for her. Suddenly, she believes there is a rare, singular, secret connection. And when someone believes they occupy a special space in another person's mind or heart, they cannot abandon that space easily, even if that space was never real, even if it was built entirely from her own projections. This part of the trick works because you give nothing concrete, and by giving nothing, you force her to fill the emptiness herself. With fantasies, with hope, with interpretation. You are no longer just a man, you have become an emotional concept. And emotional concepts are impossible to forget because they are not tied to reality. They are tied to the imagination. She thinks about you not because she wants to, but because she now needs to give meaning to the internal chaos you awakened. And while that chaos has no form, she keeps returning, reliving, analyzing, desiring. At this stage, Machiavellian filth deepens to a level where you no longer operate merely as presence or absence. You become an internal emotional axis, something she consults mentally before acting, deciding, dressing, speaking. She begins to imagine herself under your gaze even when she is alone. And this means your influence has crossed behavior and reached her inner core, the layer where beliefs, fears, and desires are shaped. Here, you do not need to manipulate directly. You simply trigger internal movements that she amplifies on her own. Every detail becomes meaning. Every gesture becomes a clue. Every silence becomes a hidden answer. You have become her perceptual filter. Everything she feels passes first through what she imagines you would think. At this point, the trick stops being a game and becomes psychological dominion. Now you apply the most cruel form of subtlety, rare, imperfect validation. The human being needs validation, and when it comes from a scarce source, it becomes priceless. You validate small aspects of her, but never the ones she expects. You do not say she is beautiful, you say she has a strange look that sometimes holds you. You do not say she is interesting, you say there are moments when she seems deeper than she lets on. You do not say you like her, you only imply that if you wanted to, she could affect you. These twisted, incomplete, indirect validations create in her a desperate need to complete what you did not say. She tries to extract the full sentence from you, the certainty, the conclusion. But you never deliver it. You give the emotional crumb that addicts more than the whole loaf. Then you add something even darker. The emotional shadow. You allow it to slip that there are things about you she will never fully understand. You hint at traumas, scars, fragments of a past you do not explain. You do not clarify anything. You only suggest. The human mind is drawn to mysteries because it wants to solve them, but it is even more drawn to mysteries that hurt. When she senses there is something inside you that made you who you are, that there is an abyss within you she might be able to reach, something awakens inside her. An instinct that is almost maternal, almost salvational, almost arrogant. The desire to be the only one capable of accessing your darkness. Women believe they can fix what fascinates them, and you turn that belief into a trap. By insinuating pain, you create imaginary intimacy. She feels she entered an emotional region of yours that no one else has seen, but that region does not exist. She built it herself. From here on, you apply the most primitive and most effective technique of psychological bonding. The emotional echo. This means subtly mirroring certain emotions she reveals. If she shows insecurity, you later show a vague insecurity of your own. If she opens up a little, you open up a little less. If she shows jealousy, you display a calculated interest in something or someone that does not even exist. The echo creates the sensation of connection, as if you are emotionally synchronized, as if something invisible is organizing the inner rhythm of both of you. But in truth, you are only returning reduced versions of what she already gave. This makes her see herself reflected in you. And when a person sees themselves in another, they believe they have found something rare. Now comes the part that truly breaks her resistance: fragmented intimacy. You share short stories, disconnected memories, moments that feel too significant to be shared with just anyone, but you never finish the story. You never explain completely. You give pieces, fragments, gaps, and each fragment feels like a key. She believes that if she gathers all these keys, she will find the door to your inner world. But there is no door. There are only fragments, distributed on purpose. She tries to assemble you like a puzzle, but pieces are always missing, and the more pieces are missing, the harder she tries to complete them. The human mind fixates on what is incomplete, and you become perfect incompleteness. It is at this stage that the most powerful and most dangerous feeling a woman can develop toward a man is born: the sense of inevitability. She begins to feel that you appeared in her life for a reason, that there is a predestined emotional connection, that what exists between you escapes logic. And all of this is the result of the sum of your Machiavellian actions: the mystery, the silence, the contradiction, the almost romance, the scarce validation, the emotional shadow, the echo, the fragments. She convinces herself that none of this is accidental. She believes there is a greater force operating between you. And when the brain assigns spiritual meaning to an emotional bond, that bond becomes almost impossible to break. This is also where you insert the weapon that seals dominance: selective withdrawal at the moment of greatest intensity. When she finally shows vulnerability, when she opens something intimate, when she admits, even indirectly, that she feels something. You pull away, not abruptly, but with cruel naturalness. You let her feel the echo of her own emotional exposure alone. She expected warmth. She received silence. And that silence weighs like rejection, but it is not rejection, it is strategic absence. You let her miss an answer that will never come. And that absence becomes a knot. It becomes obsession, it becomes emotional debt. She feels that something remains unresolved between you, and whoever feels unresolved tension cannot walk away, because the human mind is incapable of closing unfinished stories. The dirtiest trick here is not that you are a mystery. It is that you made her believe you are her mystery, that you belong to an emotional territory inside her that only she knows, that there is something between you that only she understands. And when a woman believes she feels something unique, she becomes a prisoner of her own feeling. Not of you, but of what you symbolize. At this stage, the Machiavellian trick reaches its most sophisticated point. You are no longer working only with her emotions. Now you are shaping the internal narratives she creates about you. Human beings do not live facts, they live stories, interpretations, versions. And the story she tells herself about you has already grown larger than reality. This is where manipulation deepens to its most refined form. It is no longer about making her feel, it is about making her assign meaning to what she feels. Once she gives meaning to what happens between you, every detail gains weight. Every gesture becomes a chapter, every absence becomes a symbol. You stop being a man and become a plot, and no one abandons a plot that has not yet reached its ending. Now you apply the coldest and most calculated technique of all: reinforcement of internal illusions. You do not tell her what you feel. You do not confirm what she imagines. You simply do small things that feed the conclusions she already built. If she believes you are intense, you offer a moment of intensity and disappear. If she believes you are distant, you give distance that feels full of meaning. If she thinks she understands you, you act differently. If she believes she does not have you, you give a small gesture that suggests maybe she does. You shape yourself not to who she is, but to who she believes you are. That is the most refined filth. You do not create the narrative, you reinforce the narrative that was born inside her. And by reinforcing it, you strengthen it. And by strengthening it, you control it. This is where you develop the most dangerous psychological weapon of all: inverted emotional mirroring. She misses you. So you suggest, without saying it, that maybe you miss her too. She expresses longing. You respond with a silence that feels deep, not negligent. She shows interest. You return interest of lower intensity, but greater weight. Inverted mirroring works like this. You feel less, but you express it in a way that seems more significant. This confuses her brain. It begins to believe there is a secret symmetry between you, when in reality, there is only a distorted reflection of what she herself feels. You return 20% of what you receive, but she perceives it as 200%, because she interprets everything through the lens of her own desire. The next step is the most Machiavellian bond technique of all: the alternation between emotional presence and interpretative absence. She opens her heart. You respond with something that does not close the conversation, but does not reject it either. She shows vulnerability. You receive it just enough, without depth. She asks something directly. You respond with something indirect. Every move you make throws her back into the same emotional state, the need to decipher. And when you feed the enigma, she convinces herself there is a hidden purpose behind everything you do. She believes there are secret intentions, repressed feelings, unspoken truths. And in the attempt to uncover them, she spends nights meeting you again inside her mind, creating theories, replaying dialogues, imagining scenarios. You dominate her mind not through what you say, but through what she believes you meant. Now the element appears that seals this emotional imprisonment, the sensation of spiritual exclusivity. This has nothing to do with religion. It has everything to do with that inexplicable feeling some people have that certain encounters are not accidental. You create this illusion of purpose through small, artificial coincidences. You mention something she had just been thinking about. You return precisely when she was about to give up. You disappear at the moment she most wanted to see you, as if life itself were coordinating the separation. You appear when she least expects it, as if you were energetically connected to her. None of this is supernatural, but it feels that way, and feeling is enough. Because the moment she believes something greater is operating between you, she stops seeing you as a choice and begins seeing you as destiny. And destiny, even when false, is a perfect prison. No one fights what they believe is inevitable. No one walks away from what they believe was placed in their path. This sense of destiny mixed with mystery creates an emotional force she cannot rationalize. And when emotion defeats logic, the mind surrenders. She begins to ask herself, why did you appear in her life? Why does she feel this way? Why is it so hard to forget you? Why is there something about you that pulls, hurts, attracts, destabilizes? And each unanswered question drives you deeper into her psyche. You become not only desire, you become existential doubt. Now you execute the most surgical strike of all, strategic withdrawal at the peak of enchantment. When she is completely trapped inside the narrative she created about you, when she finally decides to open her heart, when she is ready to confess something, you step back, you do not run, you do not disappear completely, you simply distance yourself enough for her to feel the pain of absence at the moment of greatest openness. That pain does not push her away, it fixes her in place. It is as if you removed a crucial piece of the story at its most important chapter, and whoever loses an essential piece begins to search relentlessly. This is how you become an involuntary thought. This is how you become a memory that disturbs. This is how you become the man she tries to forget and cannot. Not because you were perfect, not because you were romantic, but because you were unfinished, and nothing terrifies the human mind more than what was never concluded. Here lies the dirtiest truth of all. You are not what she desires. You are what she could not complete. And what is never completed is never forgotten. We have reached the apex of manipulation, the point where you no longer need to make any effort. Because now the one working for you is her own mind. This is the final form of the Machiavellian trick. You become a permanent psychic presence, a kind of emotional shadow that appears at random moments, interprets silences that do not even exist, and creates meaning where there was once only noise. She no longer thinks about you because she wants to. She thinks about you because she has been conditioned. And this conditioning does not feel like manipulation. It feels like destiny, intensity, chemistry, connection. The most brilliant trap is always the one that disguises itself as an inner truth. She believes all of this arises spontaneously, when in reality she is only reliving patterns you installed with surgical precision. At this stage, you apply the coldest maneuver of all, the illusory ending. It is not a breakup because there was never a beginning. It is not a goodbye because you were never truly there. It is only a natural distancing, almost imperceptible, something that seems like a consequence of life, timing, coincidence. You do not break anything, you simply allow the bond inside her to continue existing on its own, fed by absence, by doubt, by an unfulfilled promise. That is the illusory ending. A closure that does not close, an ending that leaves loose threads, a silence that seals nothing. And it is this nothing that teaches, because as long as something remains unfinished, memory survives, and as long as memory survives, you survive. But the apex of the trick lies in what happens inside her after you leave. She does not feel only longing, she feels failure. She feels she did not say something she should have. She feels she did not understand something she needed to. She feels she could have acted differently and did not. She feels she did not decipher you in time. She feels she let something rare escape. This sensation of psychological error creates an endless loop of mental revisiting, and every mental revisiting strengthens you as a psychic presence. She replays conversations that will never happen again, remembers looks that may never have mattered, tries to reorganize signals you may never have given. She tries to correct the past, and while she tries, she keeps you alive in the present. This is how the dirtiest trick perpetuates itself. You force her to fight a ghost. Now, even without being there, you introduce the final weapon, the illusion of resolution. At some point, months later, you reappear minimally. A greeting, a reply, a neutral comment, something too small to mean anything, but large enough to ignite. And that spark awakens the entire old fire. It is like blowing on ashes and discovering hidden embers. Her brain enters instant emotional vigilance. She interprets this minimal appearance as possibility, reopens the story that was never closed, rebuilds expectations, reignites projections, and you, without any effort at all, return to the center of her psyche. Because nothing is reborn more powerfully than something that never truly died. The most perverse part of this phase is that you no longer need to play. She plays alone. She idealizes you without encouragement. She revisits you without you doing anything. She desires you without you appearing. The trick becomes self-sustaining because the engine is now internal, not external. You are the broken mirror in which she tries to see herself whole. And the more she tries, the more fragmented she feels. And the more fragmented she feels, the more she believes you are the missing piece. This is how desire turns into dependence. When someone believes the other holds something they themselves have lost, the dirtiest truth is revealed. The mind does not fall in love with what it has. It falls in love with what is missing, and you represent that perfectly. The perfect absence, the unresolved enigma, the almost love, the almost romance, the almost meeting, the almost destiny. You become an absence shaped like a presence, a gap she tries to fill with her own fantasy, and fantasy is always more powerful than reality. No one can compete with what she imagines about you because imagination has no limits. You do not win by being exceptional, you win by being indeterminate. Not by being complete, but by being incomplete. Not by being everything, but by being what she could never finish. The final trick, the ultimate filth, is this. You convince her that she feels something unique when the only real feeling is the one she created alone. You are not the object of desire, you are the trigger, you are not love, you are projection, you are not the man, you are the interpreted silence. That is why she thinks about you when she wakes up, when she works, when she tries to forget, when she talks to other men, when she stares at the ceiling before sleeping, because you are not there, but you never truly left. The void you created is larger than any presence she could have had. In the end, the dirtiest trick Machiavelli ever left to make a woman think about you is this. Do not occupy her place. Occupy her imagination. Be absence loaded with meaning. Be silence filled with interpretations. Be a mystery that never resolves. When you become the unanswered question, she can spend her entire life searching for an answer that never existed. And while she searches, you remain eternal in her mind. Not because you deserved it, but because you were skilled enough to never fully reveal yourself. This is what everyone hides. It is not feeling that binds. It is incompleteness. It is not presence. It is absence. It is not love. It is the enigma.